Good afternoon. Welcome to today's NCAA Division I Committee on Infractions press call. All participants are currently in listen-only mode. After speakers provide their remarks, there will be an opportunity for media questions. And now I will turn the call over to Matt Mykrit, NCAA Managing Director for the Office of the Committees on Infractions. Matt?
Thank you. Welcome to today's press call to discuss the NCAA Division I Committee on Infractions panel's decision regarding LSU. As members of the media, you should have received a link to both the press release and the public decision, which contains the details of this case. This information can also be found at ncaa.org. The Committee on Infractions is a group comprised of representatives across the NCAA membership and the public who are separate from NCAA staff. The committee members who reviewed this case include Bill Bach, attorney in private practice, Steve Madva, attorney in private practice, Joe Novak, retired football coach from Northern Illinois, Dave Roberts, Chief Hearing Officer, Chair of the Division I Committee on Infractions and Special Advisor to Southern California, and Mary Scooten, former Executive Vice President and Provost at Central Michigan. Dave Roberts will now discuss the findings of the Committee on Infractions. Following his opening comments, he will take questions.
Thank you, Matt. Good morning or good afternoon, as it may be for all of you. The Committee on Infractions decision details the findings and penalties in this case. Our comments today are designed to address anticipated questions. However, the decision stands on its own merits and it does speak for itself. The committee is aware that LSU has a pending case before the Independent Accountability Resolution process. However, that process is handled separately from the Committee on Infractions, and my remarks today will center solely on the violations in the case at hand. The violations in this case occurred during the association-wide COVID-19 recruiting dead period, which began in 2020, which was intended to protect the health of university staff, student athletes, and prospects amid the uncertainty of the pandemic. The dead period was also intended to provide a level playing field for NC2A member schools at that time, when state-by-state COVID regulations varied drastically and could have provided recruiting advantages to schools in some states with lesser state-imposed regulations. Although the violations in this case are not the most egregious this committee has seen, they do represent significant intentional and willful disregard of NC2A rules, which risk not only the fairness in college sports, but also the health of those directly involved. Dead period rules do not allow for any in-person recruiting contacts between coaches, institutional staff members, or prospects. However, they do not prevent prospects from independently arranging visits to college campuses. In this case, the LSU coaches and recruiting personnel became aware of one such independent visit in September of 2020. And the day before those prospects arrived, the LSU Compliance Department met with the football staff to review the dead period rules, emphasizing that the staff could not have in-person contact with the prospects at that time. One of the prospects was joined by his mother, who had expressed a desire to move to Baton Rouge if her son committed to play for LSU. That prospect's mother asked the former assistant football coach to recommend potential neighborhoods for her to consider were she to move. The former assistant coach included his own neighborhood amongst those suggestions and arranged to greet the prospect and provided turn-by-turn instructions to his family as they drove through the neighborhood during the visit. During that encounter, which violated the dead period rules, the assistant coach also provided the prospect with a bag of used LSU gear in violation of NC2A rules for recruiting inducements. The following weekend, the same prospect returned to Baton Rouge on a previously planned trip with his family. The former assistant director of recruiting picked the prospect and his girlfriend up from their hotel and drove them to the football stadium for a tour, which again violated dead period rules. Later that day or the following day, the former assistant director for recruiting returned to the prospect's hotel and delivered several items of used LSU gear for the prospect, again violating NC2A rules for recruiting inducement. During the second trip to Baton Rouge, the recruit and his family again drove through the former assistant coach's neighborhood, which the assistant coach was aware of at the time, and he stood outside the home to engage in another brief conversation with the prospect's family. Again, the interaction violated NC2A rules. The committee reviewed the full case record and determined the violations were as follows. Level 2 mitigated for LSU. Level 2 aggravated for the former assistant coach. Level 2 standard for the former assistant director of recruiting. The committee accepted all of LSU's self-imposed penalties. The committee also prescribed probation for the school and a show cause order for the former assistant coach, detailed further in the decision and the news release. This concludes my opening remarks.
Megan, can you please explain how reporters can indicate that they would like to ask a question?
For all reporters who would like to ask a question, please use the raise your hand function at the bottom of the Zoom screen. When you are called upon, we will unmute your line. Please state your name and affiliation before asking your question. And our first question will come from Wilson Alexander. Please go ahead.
Dave, Wilson Alexander from The Advocate. Will the ruling today in any way affect the ultimate decision in the IARP case that's being considered on LSU?
Not from the perspective of the COI. We make our decisions wholly separate and apart from the independent track. So I do not believe it would have a part of that process at all. But of course, we're not that body. But I believe the answer is no. You know, let me ask one thing. I mean, obviously, we found a violation that occurred. Whether or not they simply take into account whether a violation occurred, that will be up to them.
Our next question will come from Michael Cobble. Please go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, I'm just curious if you're able to comment on how many active investigations LSU has going right now.
Yeah, that would, I mean, the COI handles the cases that are brought to it. We do not conduct the investigation. So I would have to speculate that that's really, it would be a question for someone in enforcement or your compliance arm to deal with enforcement, but I really can't comment on that.
Thank you for joining us today. This concludes our comments. A recording of the press conference will be available soon at ncaa.org. Thank you.